So my talk is about XRPL validation message service. I'm Anurag Patel. I'm a developer at XRPSCAN. Most of the stuff that we do is open source on GitHub. I have the links at the end. You can go and check out. The service itself is called Project Hermes. Hermes, as you may know, is in Greek mythology, functions as an emissary and messenger of the gods. So what Hermes is essentially is it's a layer 2 messaging network to store and relay XRPL validation messages. Now, why do we need to do that? Why do we need Hermes service in the first place? The messages, the validation messages, when they are emitted by RippleD, they are ephemeral. If you do not store them, they're lost. They are relayed in the network, and they use for communication, things like amendment voting, fee voting, and stuff. If you do not store them, they're lost. And the problem is if you have a script which is monitoring these validation messages, and you need to make some changes to it, or you need to restart the service, or you need to restart RippleD, you lose out on the messages. Like, say, for example, RippleD takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes to restart, so you have about a gap of 100 validation messages which are missing. So the idea is to have a P2P network wherein every node, Hermes node, will store the messages in their local data store, and they can add each other, trust each other, and if they restart for any reason, they can fetch messages, missing messages from their peers. So trying to approach like from 99% coverage to 100% coverage. It's a theoretical aim, but we're trying to reach there. Now, what does a validation message look like? So if you listen to the validation stream of RippleD, these are some of the properties. Cookie, data contains the actual binary validation message, the entire message itself. There's some flags, there's a ledger index, hash, master key, public key, and signature. This is how a message looks like. Now, why do we need to track validation messages in the first place? You must have seen on XRPSCAN.com, there's a dashboard which shows you amendments and validators. So amendments, these are the changes that are proposed in RippleD to the protocol, and new features are brought into the network via amendments. So every validator puts in a vote in the validation message saying, we are voting for amendment hash number this, 1, 2, 3. It's an array. And that needs to be tracked. For historical reasons, if we need to go back and see how was XRPSCAN validator voting in the last 6 months, which amendments did it vote for or said no for. Fee voting, for example, also comes via validation messages. There is a separate property over there. So recently, I think 1 or 2 years ago, we dropped the account reserve from 20 XRP to 10 XRP, and owner reserve also we dropped. So that voting also happens via validation messages. So each validator emits its own preferences, and when we reach a consensus, everybody sets that as a fee. Tracking things like amendment gaining a majority or losing majority. So if you have 80%, if you just go below 80%, 79%, then the 40-day counter which is there, it resets, and you need to start back again. So tracking these things requires you to store validation messages. If you do not have them, you lose out. So that's the dashboard which is coming out of the validation messages. Things like validator performance. If you have a UNL, if I'm trusting 35 validators right now, and I need to bring in a new validator to my UNL, how do I know them? Like, I can go to the domain and see what business are they, or are they a good individual? Like, are they well-known so I can trust them? Or one of the metrics that I personally use is how good is their validator performing? Things like, are they missing any validations? We can always ask them, like, what infrastructure are you using? Are you on the cloud, or are you a bare metal? What kind of disk are you using? But this gives you a very accurate view of how many validations they've missed in the last 6 months. So if there's a gap of 20 validations every day, then maybe the infrastructure is not so good. I would probably trust someone who is like 100% coverage. So that helps you take data-driven decisions on which validators to add to a UNL. And this is a dashboard which shows you what's the RippleD upgrade status, for example. 1.12 released 2-3 days ago, but before that, took a screenshot before that. So this is, it shows you 1.11 is the dominant version. Now this is possible if you aggregate the validation messages and store it in a data store. And detecting unresponsive validator. For example, there's if you see the validator page, you can see the validators who have not been responding last 2 hours. They are shown in a yellow bar. So these are things that can help, that can be derived from the validations. The architecture. This is a cluster of 3 nodes, a hypothetical cluster of 3 nodes, node 1, node 2, node 3. Now, an individual validation message service node will have a Node.js application called as Hermes daemon. It's just a Node.js application with REST endpoint and gRPC endpoint. We'll talk about it. And it connects to a RippleD server from where it fetches validations. It could be local RippleD server or remote RippleD server. And it stores everything into MongoDB, which can be local remote. It just needs a configuration URL. Now this node 1 trusts node 2 and node 3. So what it will do is, periodically, it's a configurable environment variable. Periodically, it'll connect to node 2 and ask them, these are the ledger range, this is the ledger range, and show me all the validations that you have. And if it's missing, I will add it. If it's there, I'll just ignore it. So this way, if I need to restart node 1 for any reason, maybe RippleD upgrade to 1.12 or anything, then I'll probably stop this machine. There'll be a downtime of, depending on my disk, 1 minute or 2 minutes. And after I come back, I will query node 3 and query node 2 and backfill my data store validation messages. Same thing in node 2 and node 3. So in this case, in this cluster, node 1 trusts node 2 and node 3, whereas node 3 only trusts node 2. You can just spin it any which way you want. Installation requirements, you need a Linux server with OpenSSL. A MongoDB server, it can be remote or local, it's fine. RippleD node, Node.js runtime, and optionally, if you want to use PM2 to manage your Node.js application, you can install that. Setup is not straightforward. You can use GitHub repository, but you would only do this once. From GitHub repository, cd hermes npm install. Those who know Node.js, it's straightforward, then npm install. And you can copy the example environment variable into .env. I will look at some of the parameters in .env. Server host name, example.com. This is where you would set your host name. This is when you set up a new Hermes cluster, the certificate will be issued against this host name. So it's important that you put something which resolves so that others can connect to your machine. Piercing poll interval is every hour I would want to connect to my peers and ask them, do you have any missing validations? Fetch depth is these many ledgers. So show me missing validations, like give me a history of 6,000 ledgers. RippleD URL straightforward. And there's also online delete. In case you want to delete old messages, something similar to how RippleD also does online delete. This is about 10 days worth of validations, 25K. Now, there are 2 modes of operation. You can switch this flag, piercing enabled or ingress enabled, and either true or false or true, whichever you want. So in the piercing mode, it will not connect to the RippleD, local RippleD. It will only fetch validation messages from its peers and store it in the database. And it will serve requests. If somebody requests validations from me, it will serve it. In ingress mode is the exact opposite. It will not fetch from the network. It will only fetch from RippleD. But if somebody asks me, give me messages, I will serve it. The reason I separated this is because of performance concerns. Like in my case, I was trying to run this on an ARM64 machine, which has a little less resources. It's cheap to just set it up. So I just separated it out. One node runs only in ingress mode, one node runs in piercing mode. So, or you can enable both. It will act as both ingress as well as piercing. Like for example, in this screenshot, PM2LS is showing Hermes is working in. The first one is the pierce, is both. Second is ingress, and third is peer sync. I've stopped the third one, is on this machine. Now, peer-to-peer network. This command is available in npm run peer add, and you can put in the domain name where you're setting up the machine. And it will connect to the configuration URL, auto-config URL. And the node ID, it will just print everything, test the connections on REST and gRPC ports, and add the node to its local peers. And periodically, depending on the settings, it will connect to the peers and fetch the missing validations. Now, the node ID is generated from the certificate. So we have set the example domain name example.com, and it will issue a certificate and create use the fingerprint and append H in the start, and then use the fingerprint as a node ID. Online delete, just note on online delete, you can set it. A lot of users, the initial users had requested this to manage their storage space. And very similar to how RippleD also works. It stores about 10 days. With this setting, it store 10 days of validations. How much data do we have right now? This node has been running for last 10 months. And I just queried the MongoDB. And it's about 1.3 billion validation messages are there right now. We're planning to double the storage so that it will last for another year. And if anyone is interested, they can peer with us and fetch these messages. These are some of the initial participants. A big thank you to all of them. The first two nodes I am running because a network will need at least 2 peer nodes to do a rolling restart. The others, XRPL services, Rippleton, XRPL data, VET, PanicBot, and Casino Coin, Eminence. Yeah, that's all from me. This is the URL where you can go and try out, read the README, and spin up a machine and ping me. I can add you. There's a website and on Twitter available. And that's all. I'm open to questions.
Hi, Anurag.
Yeah.
Will the regular specs of the RippleD server work if you're using RippleD, or do you need higher specs for this?
For RippleD, I think you can use the stanza tiny, the node size tiny, and you can use it. The only thing that I need, the service needs, is it should be able to send me validation message as quickly as they are closed. If it satisfies the criteria, whatever machine can run RippleD in tiny mode is OK with us.
And in terms of how much is that billions of messages, how many, 1 TB?
Yeah, so 1.3 billion right now is about 800 gigabytes of storage. So you can extrapolate. That's about 10 months of data with about 120 or 130 validators checking in every 3 seconds.
OK, because my next question was to do with that. How long do you think it'll take to sync, or is it better to give a dump for somebody to?
It's better to give a dump. MongoDB dump and restore would be much faster than doing on protocol. But again, shipping the disk would be also a question. And Hermes, when it stores, when it uses a native protocol, with every insert, it will do the verification of the validation message based on signature. If signature verification fails, then it will not store it. So on protocol is more reliable in terms of you do not trust the other peer. You should always use on the protocol way. If you trust them, like it's on my own server, I would probably take a dump and just restore it. But whichever mode it is, if it's connecting to RippleD and storing it, or if it's connecting to peer network and storing it, in both cases, it will verify the signature and save it.
Any other questions?
Yeah, is Hermes aware of the UNL, or does it just store every validation that RippleD gives it regardless?
Yeah, it isn't aware. The reason being from 1.17 or 16 onwards, RippleD nodes have started to relay all the messages that they. So this also came around the same time, so I just piggybacked on the same idea. I do not need to trust anyone. My RippleD node is trusting everything and relaying everything, so it just this happened.
Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time you put into the project. With regard to the database, does Hermes provide any tooling for querying the database, or is that something that you would expect like a separate piece of software to do? And if you wanted to get statistics or so forth.
Right. So Hermes has a REST endpoint, and the only APIs that I provide is the auto configuration URL, which is /server/config, where it will expose the certificate and the API addresses, and it has another server info endpoint. But that can be expanded, and we can query the local database and do analytics on that. But right now, it does not do that, but I don't anticipate a separate tool is required. I personally just query the data store using MongoDB query commands. But it's fairly easy because it's a Node.js and Express application. It's very easy to just write another controller over there and do analytics on top of that.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Can I run it behind a gateway now, too? I think that was an issue initially.
Yes. I did look at your feature request. I haven't worked on it, but that's the GitHub page.